Welcome to Nero Wolfe's world, where orchids bloom and secrets unfold. Tell us where you're tuning in from. Archie will keep score, Wolfe won't admit he cares. Subscribe for more classic Nero Wolfe mysteries. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the Lady with Two Spaniels. The night rain had the temperament of a bookie who'd been stiffed, persistent, unpleasant, and not taking no for an answer. I was halfway through a lamb chop at Rusterman's when the maitre d' approached my table like a man carrying bad news on a silver tray. He bent close enough for me to smell imported worry in his cologne and murmured, "Telephone for you, Mr. Goodwin." Nobody rings Rusterman's for social chatter, not unless they've already paid for it. I wiped my mouth, left the chop to its fate, and made my way to the lobby phone booth. The glass was fogged. My reflection looked like it had been smeared by guilt. I lifted the receiver. "Mr. Goodwin, this is— oh, thank heaven, this is Mrs. Kellner. Daphne Kellner." The voice trembled like a debutante on her first martini. "You don't know me, but I was given your number by Miss Bonner at the Gazette. You're Mr. Wolfe's assistant, aren't you?" "That's the rumour," I said. "Though some would say I'm his conscience. What seems to be the trouble?" Someone's been in my apartment. Nothing taken, but my dogs, my Spaniels. They're terrified. They bark at the bedroom mirror as if something inside it will come out. I can't call the police. It would be dreadful for the papers. Now, I've had my share of nocturnal phone calls, usually from dames convinced their husbands are up to something creative, but dogs afraid of mirrors was new even for me. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you work for Mr. Wolfe, and because you might understand discretion. Please, Mr. Goodwin, I can't sleep another night in that apartment." Her address came out in a shaky whisper. Penthouse, Columbus Circle, the kind of building that hires doormen with vocabularies smaller than their biceps. I told her I'd be there in 20 minutes and hung up, abandoning the lamb chop to culinary history. Outside, the rain turned the sidewalk into polished onyx. I hailed a cab whose driver looked like he'd lost faith in humanity sometime during Prohibition. Columbus Circle at 10:30 was mostly empty, just a carousel of headlights circling statues no one looked at. Mrs. Kellner opened her own door. Unusual, considering the species of socialite usually has servants for that. She was tall, fragile, with one of those faces that promise tragedy for breakfast. A silk robe clung to her like a scandal she couldn't shake. Two caramel-coloured spaniels hovered behind her ankles, eyes white with fright. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Goodwin," she said, leading me into a room where money had gone to die tastefully. Pale walls, heavy drapes, and mirrors everywhere, as if she couldn't stand to be alone without witnesses. "I wouldn't dream of turning down an invitation from a lady whose dogs bark at themselves," I said. "Where's the crime scene?" She managed a thin smile and gestured toward the bedroom. The spaniels refused to follow us, whining low. Inside, the air smelled faintly of violets and something sharper beneath. The ghost of chloroform, maybe, or expensive cleaning fluid. The dressing table mirror was cracked at the bottom, a spider web running through the silver. "I came in an hour ago," she said, voice dropping. "That mirror was perfect this afternoon. And look, someone's moved my jewelry box just slightly. Nothing's missing, I think, but you've got the jitters," I finished. "That's understandable. Mind if I take a look around?" She nodded. I examined the room. No forced entry, no footprints on the thick carpet, but near the closet door, faint scratches. Fresh. Whoever had been here had gloves, patience, and an idea of what they wanted. "Mrs. Kellner," I said, "you mentioned a husband." Her shoulders stiffened. "Howard Kellner. He's away. Business upstate." I grunted. "The financial kind of business, or the kind that involves a woman who claims to have lost her memory?" She turned toward the window. "You're very direct." "Habit. Keeps me employed. Is he with a firm?" "Was. Kellner and Merrow, investments. It dissolved." That made the penny drop. Howard Kellner, Wall Street operator who'd bowed out of the market a few months back when the securities boys sniffed around his accounts. I kept my face neutral. "So, this isn't about pearls and phantoms after all." "I told you," she said quickly, "nothing's missing. Only, someone's been here and my dogs. They sense things. They bark at that mirror constantly. I crouched, studying the cracks. The silver backing had been tampered with. A tiny rectangle had been pried loose, then replaced. Behind it, I found the faint outline of adhesive. No note, no photo. Just a space where something small and flat once lived. "All right," I said. "Who else has a key to this apartment?" "Only my husband, and the maid, Celeste. She's gone for the week, visiting family." "Any jealous friends? Men who think dinner means a lifetime contract?" Her laugh was a small, brittle thing. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm not that kind of woman." "Good. I'm not that kind of detective. I prefer murder to melodrama." The rain thickened against the windows, drumming like a typewriter that had too much to say. I did a slow circle of the room, feeling eyes on my back, the mirrors, hers, or the dog's. They whimpered from the hall, refusing to enter. I couldn't blame them. When I left, she followed me to the door. "Will you tell Mr. Wolfe?" "I always tell him. It saves time when he guesses it anyway." She pressed an envelope into my hand. "A retainer," she said. It was thick enough to make Fritz smile in his sleep. Back in the cab, I counted raindrops and banknotes. The meter hit 350 by the time we reached the brownstone. Inside, the world smelled of polish, orchids, and Fritz's late-night cocoa, better than church incense. Wolfe was in his chair, volume of Pliny on his lap, expression announcing that civilization had already disappointed him for the evening. "You are damp," he observed without looking up. "It's fashionable," I said, peeling off my coat. "We've got a client, a Mrs. Daphne Kellner, who thinks her mirror's been moonlighting as a ghost." He turned a page. "I dislike hauntings. They require too many adjectives." "She's also rich, nervous, and possibly sitting on the remains of her husband's brokerage firm. That make it less tiresome?" That got him. The book closed with a soft thud. "Howard Kellner." "You know him?" "I know his accountant, a man of dismal veracity. Sit down, Archie, and elucidate." I gave him the short version, the frightened lady, the cracked mirror, the dogs auditioning for Macbeth, and the perfume with the chemical aftertaste. Wolfe listened, fingertips pressed like he was praying for patience. "Pfui," he said at last. "A woman imagines burglars because her husband is missing and her conscience is lively. The dogs react to her agitation. Yet—" His eyes narrowed. "You said adhesive behind the mirror." "Something flat used to be there. Microfilm maybe, or a love note from the janitor." He tugged the bell cord. Fritz appeared at the doorway with the quiet grace of a Swiss ghost. "Beer," Wolfe said, "and a sandwich for Mr. Goodwin. He'll need sustenance while reciting his adventure." I grinned. "Make it ham, Fritz." The lamb died in vain. When Fritz vanished, Wolfe said, "You will tomorrow revisit the apartment and obtain the maid's full name and address. Have Saul Pantzer verify whether she truly has relatives." "That's a lot of work for a phantom burglar." "It is," he said, "but it will prevent your premature burial should the phantom acquire a firearm." "Touching, boss. I didn't know you cared." "I don't. You are simply more useful alive." The beer arrived, properly chilled. I took a long sip. Wolfe watched with the air of a man enduring a vulgar display of human necessity. "There's one more item," I said. "She mentioned the name Julian Merrow, her husband's old partner. Said he smiled too much." Wolfe's eyelids drooped. "Merrow, yes, a social climber without altitude. You see, Archie, mirrors are not solely for reflection. They are also portals for self-deception. These people spend fortunes to stare into polished lies." "That's poetic for you," I said. "Maybe the mirror didn't like what it saw." He gave me the look that usually precedes my eviction from the office. I drained my glass. "So, what's our next move?" He considered. "We wait until morning. I will not be induced to action before breakfast, orchids and coffee. Meanwhile, if someone's still creeping around her apartment, then he will creep. The world is full of men intent on nocturnal folly. I cannot reform them all." "Comforting philosophy," I said. He gestured to the stairs. "Go to bed, Archie. In the morning we shall see whether Mrs. Kellner's imagination survived the night." I rose. "If she doesn't, do I still collect the retainer?" "Go." I left him with Pliny and his beer, climbed to my room, and listened to the rain losing interest in the city. Somewhere uptown, 2 dogs were staring at a cracked mirror, and I had the uneasy feeling they weren't the only ones seeing double. The brownstone settled into silence, the the kind that had its own heartbeat. Wolfe's voice drifted faintly up the stairwell. "Archie, lock the door." I smiled. "Always do." The rain stopped just before midnight, leaving Manhattan slick and shining like a mirror with something nasty behind the glass. The morning had the complexion of old pewter, grey, streaked and slightly resentful. By the time I reached Mrs. Daphne Kellner's penthouse, the city was still shaking off its rain hangover from the night before. The doorman gave me the once-over, the kind that files you under detective, probable nuisance, and buzzed me upstairs with the air of a man performing a necessary evil. She opened the door herself again, which either meant she didn't trust her help or she didn't have any left to trust. The scent of lilies and cigarette smoke greeted me first. The perfume came later, wrapped around her like gilt that cost $75 an ounce. She was wearing a pale grey house dress, loose enough to suggest fatigue and tailored enough to insist she cared what I thought. Her eyes had that glassy sheen you get from 3 nights without sleep or 1 night with the wrong kind of conscience. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, voice trembling just enough to make it seem unscripted. "You came." "I make it a rule," I said, stepping inside. "If a lady calls me after midnight about her haunted furniture, I don't keep her waiting." The living room was a decorator's dream, modern, mirrored, and as personal as a hotel lobby. The 2 Spaniels were still there, crouched beneath a Chippendale table, staring out as though the apartment had turned enemy territory overnight. I gave them a friendly whistle. One whimpered. The other looked like he wanted to call his lawyer. "They haven't stopped since that night," she said softly. "They won't go near the bedroom. Animals sense things we don't." "I'll take the dogs for questioning," I told her. "They look more cooperative than your friends on Wall Street." That earned me the faintest flicker of a smile, the first I'd seen. She led me toward the bedroom again, and this time I noticed more details. The faint smell of something chemical in the hall, not perfume, not polish, chloroform, if my nose hadn't retired. The mirror was the same one I'd seen last night, the crack glinting like a frozen lightning bolt. But the jewelry box had moved again, a subtle inch to the left. Either she was rearranging furniture to keep busy, or someone else still was. "Mrs. Kellner," I said, crouching near the closet, "when did your husband vanish?" 3 days ago, after an argument." "About what?" "About missing bonds," she said quickly, then caught herself, pressing a manicured hand to her mouth. "I mean, not missing exactly, misplaced." "Sure, they always are right before the auditors misplace a warrant." She flinched. I'd learned long ago that the truth, applied gently, could sting better than sarcasm. "He left after dinner. I thought he went to the club, but when I called, they said he hadn't been there all week." "And you didn't call the police?" "Of course not. The publicity alone. My charities would be ruined. People love generosity in headlines, but not scandal." I stood, brushing my knees. "You realize that makes me the only person currently looking for your husband. That puts me at the top of a very short list of idiots." Her eyes filled slightly, though whether from fear or performance I couldn't swear. "You think something's happened to him?" "I think something's happened, period. Whether it's to him, to your finances, or to your nerves is what I'm here to find out." On the dresser stood a framed photo. Howard Kellner, square-jawed and smug beside a younger man with perfect teeth and hunting boots. Between them hung a trophy deer that looked like it regretted the company. "Who's the Boy Scout?" I asked. "That's Julian Merrow, Howard's partner. They were close." "How close?" She frowned. "Business close." I nodded, the kind of nod that says we'll see. "He's still in New York?" I'm not sure." The hesitation was tiny, but there. I've seen bigger clues buried under poker faces, and this one screamed louder than both dogs combined. I noted it mentally and bent near the closet door. The scratches were still visible, thin, deliberate, and clustered around the handle. Someone had tried to open it fast but quietly. "You keep chloroform handy?" I asked. She blinked. "Chloroform?" "There's a faint smell. Either someone cleaned the rug with hospital supplies, or somebody got cozy with a bottle meant for surgery." No, of course not. I wouldn't even know where to get such a thing." "Your husband would. Finance and pharmaceuticals share a lot in common. Both run on numbers and nerve." That one she didn't answer. I turned to the window, half expecting to see a shadow move outside, but the glass only held our reflections, hers pale, mine cynical, both waiting for the other to blink. The motif of mirrors again. I made a note that if I ever took up interior decorating, I'd outlaw the things. She followed my gaze. You don't believe me. I believe you're scared. I also believe scared people sometimes lie without meaning to. It's an occupational hazard of guilt. Her chin lifted. I'm not guilty of anything. Except bad company. Happens to the best. The dogs whimpered again. She moved to them, kneeling, murmuring nonsense that might have comforted a child but only made the Spaniels twitch harder. I used the moment to pocket a quick mental photo of the room. No misplaced dust, no random prints, but an odd smear on the mirror frame. I rubbed it with my thumb. Fine powder, chalky, sweet-smelling. Traces of cyanide compounds sometimes left that smell. I didn't tell her that. Mrs. Kellner, I said, did your husband keep a study or office here? Yes, down the hall. We moved to it. The room was smaller but more personal. Mahogany desk, unopened mail, and the faint smell of pipe smoke that had died waiting for an owner. On the blotter lay a note addressed simply, to H, written in feminine script. She saw it when I did and moved fast. Too fast. It's nothing, she said, palming the note. Nothing often comes in envelopes, I said mildly. You mind if I look? It's private, I gave her a look. Everything's private until someone gets murdered. Then it's public record. That broke her composure. All right, it's from his secretary. She's been with him 10 years. She worries easily. And writes affectionate notes signed with initials. Got it. I let it go. A good red herring never needed chasing until it started wagging its tail. I walked the perimeter of the room, glancing at the bookshelves. Financial manuals, travel guides, and one curious outlier. Dogs of distinction, open to a chapter on breeding and pedigree markings. The same kind of dogs under the table. You into dog shows, Mrs. Kellner? She blinked. Not particularly. Your husband? He liked them, said they relaxed him. Funny hobby for a man under investigation. I turned back toward her. Mrs. Kellner, I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying your story's missing more pages than a cheap mystery. If you want Wolfe to help, he'll need all of it. She nodded slowly, folding her arms like she was holding herself together. Will he tell anyone? Wolfe? He wouldn't tell the weather if it rained on his orchids. That earned a fragile laugh. I took it as permission to leave before the tears arrived. On my way out, I paused to scratch the nearest dog behind the ear. He shivered but didn't bite, which put him ahead of most suspects I meet. Back at the brownstone, the clock on Wolfe's desk read 12:05. Orchid hour had ended at 11, which meant I had 55 seconds to start my report before lunch cut me off the payroll. Wolfe was at his desk, sorting mail with surgical disdain. You are early, he said without looking up. And damp again. Rain's contagious this week, I said. Your client's scared stiff, her husband's missing, and someone's been seasoning the place with chloroform. He looked up then, the kind of slow lift that means I'd bought myself an extra sentence. Explain. I did, starting with the scratches, the chemical scent, and ending with the photo of the two men and the trophy deer. He listened, eyes half closed, fingertips meeting like two conspirators. When I finished, he sighed. Emotional women often hire us not for truth, but for absolution. Maybe, I said, but if absolution smells like chloroform, I'll take guilt any day. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz, lunch. Then to me, write your notes. And Archie, do not allow compassion to cloud your senses. The woman is hiding something. I noticed, but she pays in cash and perfume. You want I should refund either? He gave me a glare meant to shrink countenance. I grinned back. Then I'll type the report, I said, heading for my desk. Maybe the dogs will send an affidavit. Behind me, Wolfe muttered, "Pfui," which, translated from Wolfese, meant, "You did well. Keep at it." I typed the first line, client, Mrs. Daphne Kellner. Condition, nervous, solvent, withholding. From upstairs, the clink of plates told me Fritz had served lunch, which meant conversation was over until 1:45 on the dot. Wolfe rose with that reluctant dignity only he could manage and said, "Join me, Archie. It appears you've earned sustenance." "Music to my ears," I said, standing, "though next time remind me to bring a gas mask to a penthouse." He allowed himself a small, weary smile, the Wolfe equivalent of applause, and as I followed him to the dining room I thought again of that cracked mirror and how sometimes the reflection tells you everything, except who's standing behind it. Money has a smell. Not the crisp, metallic tang they put on new bills, but the odour of fear that comes from men who think they might lose it. You could smell it all over Wall Street that morning, mixed with rain steam and yesterday's cigars. I was at Kellner and Merrow's old brokerage office downtown, the kind of place where marble met mildew. The elevator had a cough, the walls had ears, and the clerk behind the front desk had both conscience and career on life support. His nameplate said D. Slattery, though he looked more like a man who'd misplace his own initials. "Mr. Merrow's not in today," he told me with the weary tone of someone who said it too often. "I figured," I said, giving him my best friendly grin. "You can't be in two places at once, especially when the second one's the front page." He blinked. "The front?" "The Gazette's warming up the presses," I said. "Something about missing millions from the Kellner Trust. I'm guessing that doesn't make a happy Monday for you folks." He swallowed. We've heard rumours. Mr. Merrow was supposed to be meeting Mr. Kellner about records, private ledgers." "Private meaning hidden?" "Private meaning confidential." "Right. And where might a man keep confidential ledgers when the auditors start sniffing?" He hesitated, then looked over his shoulder before lowering his voice. "Mr. Kellner had a safe deposit box. Bank of Manhattan on Broad Street. Only he and Mr. Merrow had access." "Still active?" "As far as I know." That was all I needed. I left him to wrestle with his integrity and headed for the curb. Manhattan's morning rush was in full stampede. I hailed a cab that looked like it had fought in the Spanish-American War and gave the driver the address. Before we reached Broad Street, my pocket buzzed with a payphone message from Lon Cohen. I ducked into a luncheonette, called him back, and got his voice, quick, nasal, and caffeinated. "Archie, you in the loop on the Kellner thing? I've got editors screaming for ink. Word is the SEC's moving in. Your guy's name is Poison." "Which guy?" "Kellner. Maybe Merrow, maybe both. I can't print rumours, but if Wolfe's nosing around, I'd like a quote." "You'll get a quote when we've got a corpse," I said. "Until then, tell your editor to keep the presses sober." "Archie," I hung up before he could get righteous. "Journalism is a fine profession, so's dentistry, if you don't mind blood." The Bank of Manhattan lobby was marble and menace, the kind of building that reminded you money didn't just talk, it sneered. I asked the manager, a pink-faced man named Willoughby, if he recalled Mr. Kellner or Mr. Merrow. "Of course," he said with bankerly cheer. "Gentlemen of substantial standing, the account is dormant." "How dormant?" "Last opened 4 days ago." That made my stomach do a two-step. Daphne Kellner had said her husband vanished 3 days ago. Someone had been 1 day early. I thanked Willoughby, palmed a receipt stub from the counter when he wasn't looking, and left. It wouldn't get me into the vault, but it told me the box number, 3172, and confirmed someone had been in there with official keys. Back outside, Saul Panzer was waiting by the curb, hat low, coat collar up. Saul never looked like he was tailing anyone, mostly because he looked like everyone else. "Morning," he said flatly. "You sent for me." "I did. There's a courier named Graves. Clerk at Kellner's office said he saw Merrow after the so-called retirement party. See if he's still breathing." "Any idea where to start?" "He drinks at McCormick's near Pearl Street. Look for a face that says regret, and hands that say pawn ticket." Saul nodded and melted into the traffic flow like fog with purpose. I walked north toward a bar called the Brass Ledger, where the brokers went to drown arithmetic in gin. It was noonish, prime hour for lunch martinis and confessions. The room smelled of vermouth, stress, and one man's lost ambition. The bartender recognized me. "You're that detective, right? The one with the fat boss and the orchid habit?" "That's us," I said. "What's the gossip from the Temple of Finance?" He shrugged, polishing a glass. "Heard Merrow and Kellner had a blowout last week. Something about the books not balancing. Then they both dropped out of sight. You ask me, they're sitting in Havana drinking each other's guilt." "Possible," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Anyone else interested in their affairs?" "Yeah," he said, nodding toward a corner booth. "That guy's been asking around all morning." The man was in his 40s, thin, nervous, with a cheap fedora and a notebook he tried to hide under his menu. I slid into the seat across from him. "Mind if I join? I hate eating alone. It feels like accounting." He looked up, startled. "Who are you?" "Archie Goodwin, freelance problem solver. You must be Graves." His jaw went slack. "Who told you?" Your employer's office. Relax. I'm not from the police. I just like tidy stories. How's yours? He licked his lips. I don't know anything. You know enough to go into hiding in the worst bar in Manhattan. That's a start. He swallowed hard. I delivered papers for Mr. Merrow. After hours. He said they were duplicates for insurance. Only one night last week I saw him and Mr. Kellner meeting in an alley behind the exchange. They were arguing about a ledger. Mr. Merrow said something about the trust won't cover it. What happened after? They left. I followed for a block. Then a black sedan pulled up. They both got in. That's the last I saw them. Can you describe the car? Dark, new, no plates, smelled like gasoline and fear. I handed him a card. If you remember anything else, call the number on the back, and don't take long walks near the river. His Adam's apple bobbed like a drowning man's. I left him there, nursing a whiskey he couldn't afford. By 2:30 I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe was at his desk, surrounded by index cards, the battlefield of an ongoing campaign against stupidity. He raised one eyebrow. You have the air of a man who has found something disagreeable. Disagreeable's putting it mild. Both Kellner and Merrow are missing. A courier saw them together after their supposed retirement, and there's a safe deposit box at the Bank of Manhattan that smells fishier than Fritz's halibut soufflé. Phooey, the halibut was exquisite. Sure, so's this mess. Cohen says the Gazette's about to headline missing millions from the Kellner Trust. If they print, we'll have reporters climbing the fence. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. Publicity, Archie, is the manure of suspicion. It makes everything grow rancid. Did you confirm whether either man opened the box? Bank says yes, 4 days ago. Then nothing. He tapped his lips. And the courier? Talks faster than he thinks. Claims he saw the pair together, arguing about ledgers. Mentions a car without plates. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Men vanish only when their absence profits the living. To vanish otherwise is theatrical nonsense. Then someone's cashing in, I said. Precisely. And you, Archie, will ensure that Saul keeps his quarry in sight. I shall prepare a list of inquiries for the Trust's accountant. We must locate the fulcrum on which their greed balanced before it collapsed. He reached for the bell cord, pulling it with the solemnity of a hanging judge. Fritz appeared at the door, immaculate as always. Beer, Wolfe said, and sandwiches. Mr. Goodwin requires nourishment before he resumes harrying the city. Make mine corned beef, I added. Hunting financiers burns calories. When Fritz departed, Wolfe gestured toward the phone. Inform Mr. Pantzer of our next step. He is to follow any thread connecting that bank box to Merrow's movements. If you can find this Graves again, extract from him a sample of his signature for comparison. Got it, I said. What about the Gazette leak? Let Mr. Cohen have his gossip. Truth, when it arrives, will make him regret premature eloquence. You've got a poetic streak today, I said. He sighed. It is not poetry, Archie. It is disgust. Money, faith, and fraud are the same God worshipped under different names. That one hung in the air long enough for Fritz to return with a tray. The beer glass was frosted, the sandwiches symmetrical enough for an engineering prize. Wolfe poured, sniffed, and sipped. I raised mine. To money, the city's favourite religion. He gave me a look that said humour was sacrilege before 2 o'clock, then closed his eyes and murmured, to its blasphemers. Without them, my profession would be impoverished. I grinned. Then here's hoping the congregation keeps sinning. He didn't smile, but one corner of his mouth twitched. A rare dividend. I knew then the wheels were turning behind those heavy lids, cataloguing greed, guilt, and the ledgers that bound them. By 3, Saul called in. Graves just ducked into a taxi, headed uptown, looked spooked. Follow him, I said. Call if he stops running. When I hung up, Wolfe's eyes were open again, sharp as knives. I suggest, Archie, you prepare for interruption. The police, the press, or a corpse will be next. Possibly all 3. You make it sound festive, I said. It will not be, he replied, but it will be profitable. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and glittering like it had just been washed for auction. Somewhere downtown, a courier was running from his conscience. 2 brokers were hiding behind missing millions, and I was stuck with a boss who could diagnose greed like a surgeon reading X-rays. Still, As I watched Wolfe sip his beer in silent judgment of mankind, I couldn't help thinking that in Manhattan, money wasn't the root of all evil. It was the soil, the seed, and the watering can. And business, as always, was blooming. By the time I reached Daphne Kellner's building again, the street out front had developed that special kind of silence New York saves for scandal. A police sedan idled at the curb, a crowd of rubberneckers collected near the awning, and the doorman looked like he wanted to resign from both his job and the human race. The gold elevator boy didn't meet my eyes, which was fine. I wasn't in a mood for confession. The 12th floor landing was crowded with blue serge and attitude. A strip of yellow police tape flapped like a cheap necktie in a draft. I ducked under it and found Pearly Stebbins planted at the door, his hat brim low and his jaw set for trouble. "Well, well," he said, chewing on invisible tobacco, "if it ain't Nero Wolfe's social secretary." "I prefer ambassador at large," and I told him. "What's the occasion, charity ball or homicide?" He gave me a look that could scrape paint. "Mrs. Kellner's dead. You tell your boss he can cross her off his client list." That stopped me cold. "Dead how?" "You don't smell it yet. Cyanide. Classy touch. She didn't make it past her first cocktail." Inside, the penthouse looked about the same as before, except for the absence of warmth. The police photographer was packing up, and a uniformed man was labelling glassware on a tray like it was a fine art exhibit. The two Spaniels sat on the rug by the couch, trembling and silent. Their leashes lay coiled beside an empty champagne flute. "She was alone?" I asked. Stebbins shook his head. "The maid came back early, found her sitting right there, glass in hand, dogs whimpering. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle. Just one lady who forgot cyanide don't mix well with brandy." I walked to the table and looked down. The glass caught the light like it knew something it wouldn't tell. A faint residue clung to the rim, dog hairs, fine and pale. "Those from her mutts?" I asked. "Maybe," said Stebbins. "Or maybe somebody added garnish." There was an odour in the air, almonds, bitter and faint, the classic calling card of cyanide. My stomach did a slow turn. "Who's handling the case?" I asked. "Kramer. You'll see him soon enough. He's already warming up for Wolfe." "Then I'll save him a seat," I said, and left before the conversation could get any friendlier. When I hit the brownstone at 3:15, Fritz had just cleared the lunch dishes. Wolfe was at his desk, a book open and a finger marking the page. He looked up as I came in, eyes narrowing a fraction. "You're early," he said. "Unusual, unless the woman has paid or perished." "Option 2, I said. "Daphne Kellner's dead. Cyanide." He didn't move, but his face hardened, a fortress sealing its gates. "Pfui, describe." I gave him the short version. Police tape, Stebbins, the dogs, the almond scent. When I mentioned the hairs in the glass, he leaned back and closed his eyes. "Dog hair," he repeated softly. "Curious. Proceed." "She died sometime around noon. The maid found her. Kramer's on the case." He opened his eyes again, slow and dangerous. "He will come here, of course. Like a tornado with a badge. Then, Archie, prepare yourself. He will be in no mood for dialectic restraint." The doorbell rang on cue, like Manhattan itself was taking orders from Wolfe. I went to answer it, and in came Inspector Kramer, red-faced, cigar-planted, and coat smelling of rain and precinct coffee. He didn't bother with greetings. "All right, Wolfe. What's your angle this time? The woman's dead within 24 hours of hiring you, and my men say your assistant was her last visitor." Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. But his tone carried more authority than a dozen standing men. "You are implying causation from coincidence, Inspector. A common fallacy." "I'm implying motive from timing," Kramer shot back. "She hires you, she talks to Goodwin, and then she swallows cyanide. That's not a fallacy, that's arithmetic." I said, "If arithmetic ever killed anyone, half of Wall Street would be corpses." Kramer's glare swung to me. "Don't get clever, Goodwin. You were there last night. You might have seen or heard something that sent her over the edge." "Sure," I said. "I told her wallpaper was gaudy. That'd depress anybody." Wolfe raised a hand, silencing me with one slow gesture. "Inspector, you are wasting effort. Mrs. Kellner was murdered. She was not the sort to court self-destruction." Kramer barked a laugh. "You didn't even meet her." "No," said Wolfe, "but Archie did. And he has sufficient judgment to distinguish hysteria from despair. Did your men recover the glass?" "Of course. We're testing it now." You will find cyanide, as you have said, and traces of dog hair, likely from her Spaniels. Unless the dogs have also acquired homicidal tendencies, I suggest you consider substitution." Kramer snorted. "You think somebody swapped her drink right under her nose, with the dogs watching?" "Perhaps," Wolfe said calmly. "Dogs observe much, comprehend little. They are loyal creatures, but their loyalty can be exploited. Tell me, were they restrained?" "Yeah. Leashes on the rug." "Then the murderer knew them well enough to handle them." Kramer frowned. "So what? Her husband? He's missing." "Precisely. Men vanish only when their absence profits the living." Kramer puffed on his cigar, the smoke curling between us like a third opinion. "I'll tell you what I think. The husband bolts with the money, the wife finds out, and she takes poison out of shame or spite. Simple." Wolfe's tone sharpened. "Nothing involving millions is simple, Inspector. Money complicates everything, especially conscience." Kramer slammed his palm on the desk. "You're always talking riddles. The DA's going to want a statement, and you'd better have something besides philosophy." "I shall," Wolfe said, "but only after you remove that odious cigar. My office is not a precinct bullpen." Kramer growled, but after a moment he stubbed it out in my ashtray. My ashtray, not Wolfe's. Even Kramer knew the boundaries. "Better?" he said. "Marginally," Wolfe replied. "Now, if you will listen instead of bluster, the poison's medium was liquid, yes?" "Yeah, brandy." "Then she did not pour it herself. The odor of almonds was too faint for immediate reaction. It was administered with precision, someone who knew dosage and delay." Kramer's jaw tightened. "You're hinting at a chemist." "I am stating a fact. Find one connected to her or her husband, and you will have your murderer." "That's convenient," he said, standing. "You're washing your hands before I've even got fingerprints." Wolfe's voice was iron wrapped in silk. "Inspector, if I wished to exculpate myself, I would not have sent Archie to the scene, nor would I have received you. My interest in this matter remains professional. If you prefer speculation to reason, I shall withdraw entirely." That made him pause. Kramer may be a bulldog, but even bulldogs know when the bone's worth keeping. He rubbed his forehead, exhaled through his nose, and said, quieter, "All right, Wolfe, I'll give you space. But if I find proof this thing touches your office, I'll be back, with paper." "Your restraint does you credit," Wolfe said. Kramer snorted. "Don't flatter me." He looked at me. "Goodwin, stay available." "Always am," I said. "You've got my number, same as every payphone in Manhattan." He left without another word. When the door clicked shut, Wolfe exhaled deeply and reached for his bell cord. "Fritz," he called, as if summoning civilization to return. "Beer." While Fritz went to fetch it, Wolfe sat motionless, eyes fixed on nothing. The silence stretched long enough for me to start counting the grooves in the desk. Finally he said, "Cyanide, a vulgar toxin, unworthy of an intelligent murderer. Quick, brutal, and common." "Common's right," I said. "There's enough of it in the papers already. Cohen's going to have a field day." He grimaced. "Then I must move swiftly. You will locate Saul and have him examine the late Mrs. Kellner's domestic arrangements. The maid, the building staff, any acquaintance permitted entry." "Think one of them spiked her drink?" "Possibly, or she trusted someone who handled it for her." Fritz returned with the tray. Wolfe poured himself a glass and lifted it to the light like a chemist contemplating sin. "Archie," he said, "did you notice whether the dogs were restrained before she died?" "Stebbins said the leashes were on the rug, looked like they hadn't moved since." He nodded. "Then whoever killed her was familiar to them. Animals are better judges of loyalty than men." "Except when they're bribed with biscuits," I said. He almost smiled. "A valid point. Let us hope the murderer has a sweet tooth." I lit a cigarette and leaned against the wall. "So what now? Wait for Kramer's lab report?" "Yes. And while we wait, you will compile a list of everyone connected to those dogs. The breeder, the trainer, the veterinarian. Loyalty, Archie, is a chain. We shall see which link breaks first." He raised his glass and drank, slow and deliberate. I couldn't tell if it was to the case, the dead woman, or his own patience. I stubbed out my cigarette and said, "I'll start with the breeder. Maybe the dogs know something they're not saying." Wolfe's eyelids lowered. "They always do, my dear Archie. The difficulty lies in translation." The clock chimed 4, orchid hour. He rose, heavy and deliberate, every inch of him broadcasting retreat. "Continue your inquiries," he said, moving toward the elevator. "I shall be unavailable until 6. "Sure," I said. "Don't let the orchids bite." He paused at the elevator door. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Do not underestimate this adversary. Sentiment is as lethal as poison." Then the elevator hummed upward, leaving me with my notebook, the faint smell of almonds, and 2 Spaniels' worth of questions. I sat down at the desk and wrote one line across the top of the page. "Case file, Daphne Kellner. Loyalty, like love, can kill its master." Then I picked up the phone to call Saul. The day started with a hangover I hadn't earned, Manhattan's kind. The city was grey, sticky, and suspicious of everybody. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to the ASPCA clerk I'd called the night before. "The Kellner Spaniels are here," she said. "Quiet enough, but they keep whining whenever we pass the kennel room with the other dogs. And this morning, well, they started barking at a photograph someone left on my desk. A man's picture. Maybe you know him." She read the name, Julian Merrow. "I know him," I said. "But he's supposed to be missing, not autographing dog photos." "You want to come see for yourself?" I did. Wolfe had been in the plant room since 9, communing with his orchids. I left a note that said, "Gone to interview the dogs. Will report if they confess." The ASPCA building sat on East 92nd, smelling of disinfectant, straw, and broken hearts. The clerk led me to a row of cages where 2 caramel-coloured spaniels blinked up at me. They were cleaner now, but their eyes were still haunted, like they'd seen a ghost wearing a leash. I pulled out a copy of Merrow's photograph, the one from Daphne's dresser, and held it up. The reaction was instant, a low growl from the male, a whimper from the female. Their tails didn't move. "See?" the clerk whispered. "They don't like him." "Join the club," I said. "You mind if I borrow this photo for an experiment?" She shrugged. "If it helps the police." "Lady, this'll help a man who makes the police look like amateurs." I left with the photo, my curiosity, and a fresh layer of dog hair. I signed the impound form so the police could collect them for evidence. "They'll be safer in uniform," I told the clerk. By the time I got back to West 35th Street, it was past 11. Wolfe was back in his chair, and Fritz had just brought in a plate of baked eggs with tarragon that made the room smell like sin in a monastery. "Ah," Wolfe said without looking up. "You have fraternized with canines." "Not in the biblical sense," I said, "but we had a chat. They're holding 2 at the ASPCA, Daphne's. When I showed them Merrow's photo, they acted like I'd waved a warrant." That got him. He looked up, eyes bright. "Dogs are rarely mistaken in their antipathies." "Which puts them ahead of most clients," I said, dropping the photo on his blotter. "You were right about one thing, though. There are 2 trails in this mess, the husband's vanishing act and Daphne's double life. Her maid says she talked about a second husband." "Second? That's the word. The maid's name's Celeste. She's back in town." "I dropped by her boarding house this morning. Said Daphne mentioned it in confidence. Something about a marriage of necessity, her words. Celeste thought she was joking." Wolfe frowned. "A foolish assumption. People confess their sins under the guise of jest. It dulls the sting." "She also said Daphne was planning a trip to the country, to a kennel in Queens, run by a Mrs. Healy." He sat forward slightly. For Wolfe, that was equivalent to a man standing on a chair and yelling Eureka. "Mrs. Healy," he murmured. "That name appears in a veterinary ledger Saul retrieved yesterday. The woman supplied anaesthetics to a clinic run by a Dr. Ambrose Vale, formerly of St. Luke's Hospital." "Meaning?" "Meaning Dr. Vale was dismissed 2 years ago for unauthorized experimentation, and Mrs. Healy's kennel is his cousin's property." I whistled. "So the dog lady's tied to a chemist who knows how to make cyanide sing lullabies." "Exactly," Wolfe said. "You will telephone Saul Panzer and instruct him to verify Dr. Vale's current whereabouts. Then have him inquire discreetly at the kennel. We must know whether Mrs. Healy bred those particular spaniels." I picked up the phone and started dialing. "If the dogs start testifying, we'll charge admission." Wolfe sighed, long and patient. "The dogs already have. They simply lack articulation." "Maybe we can teach them Morse code," I said. He ignored me. "We are now confronted with a pattern of duplication. 2 dogs, 2 men, perhaps even 2 marriages. The motif is consistent with deceit in every form. I dislike deceit. It offends order. Fritz appeared in the doorway as though summoned by logic itself. "Lunch in 15 minutes, sir." "Thank you, Fritz," Wolfe said. Then to me, "You will eat, but not before delivering a summary to Mr. Panzer." I finished the call just as the elevator doors opened and Wolfe began his slow ascent toward the orchids. His retreat was timed with surgical precision, orchid hour, exactly 4 minutes early. That left me alone with my typewriter and the 2 photo prints on Wolfe's desk, one of Nero and Kellner, the other of the dogs. I looked from one to the other. 2 partnerships, both smiling for the camera, both probably hiding something that could bite. Saul called back at 2:10. "Archie, got something on Dr. Vale. Lives out in Forest Hills, keeps a private lab in his garage. Neighbours think he's developing hair tonic, but the Board of Health thinks otherwise. I can check him tonight." "Make it sooner," I said. "And if you stop by Mrs. Healy's kennel, count how many dogs match Daphne's pair. If they've got twins, that's our trail." "Copy that," Saul said, and hung up. At 1 o'clock sharp, Fritz announced lunch. Wolfe came down smelling faintly of orchids and self-satisfaction. We ate cold salmon and beet salad in silence for 5 minutes before he spoke. "Archie," he said, "you have not told me your opinion of Celeste's statement." "She's scared," I said. "Claims she didn't know about any second husband, but her eyes said otherwise. She also mentioned Daphne kept a locked chest in her bedroom. Small, brass, no key in sight. She assumed it held jewellery. Said once she glimpsed a folded license-looking paper inside before Daphne snapped the lid shut." Wolfe shook his head. Jewellery would have been insured and inventoried. More likely documents. A marriage certificate, perhaps. "Or divorce papers," I said. He lifted an eyebrow. "A semantic distinction. Either way, it implies an attempt at erasure. People who hide unions wish to bury identities." "You're saying she had a husband on the side?" "I'm suggesting she was married twice and legally to only one man at a time. A convenient arrangement for blackmail." That made sense. Maybe too much. "So, who was the blackmailer?" I asked. "Possibly Mr. Nero," Wolfe said. "The younger man in the photograph has the smile of a parasite. He could have discovered the secret and used it to gain leverage, financial or personal. If she resisted, she might have threatened exposure. Result: cyanide." "Nice and neat," I said. "Except we still don't know who poured it." "We will," Wolfe said, "when the dog's breeder speaks. Mrs. Healy's connection to Dr. Vale is the hinge. If Vale provided the anaesthetics, he could have supplied the poison." "Assuming Daphne didn't order it herself," I said. "Maybe she planned to use it first." "Redundant," he said sharply. "She hired us, which indicates intention to survive." I grinned. "I like your optimism, boss. It keeps the undertakers hungry." He gave me a look that might have turned granite introspective. "Archie, cynicism is an inefficient shield. Reserve it for the living, not the dead." That took the grin out of me, at least for a minute. After lunch, Wolfe dictated a note to Saul for delivery to Inspector Kramer, a polite request for lab results from the poisoned glass. He used the phrase in the spirit of mutual edification, which would either amuse Kramer or raise his blood pressure another notch. When Fritz cleared the plates, Wolfe leaned back, fingers interlaced across his midsection. "We stand at a crossroads. The financial trail leads to missing millions, the personal one to deceit and poison. Both may end at the same door." "Whose door?" I asked. "That," he said, "depends on whether loyalty belongs to the master or the pet." I said, "You're talking about the dogs again." "I am talking about everyone," he said, closing his eyes. "Even you, Archie. We all obey something." I left him to his philosophizing and headed for my desk. There was a report to type, a call to Saul to schedule, and a faint hope that the next corpse wouldn't bark before dying. I sat down, rolled in the paper, and started typing. Subject: the double trail. Summary: 2 dogs, 2 husbands, and 1 poisoner too clever for coincidence. Then I added my own footnote for the file. If the dogs are lying, they're the first witnesses in history to do it for free. If you ever want to test the strength of your faith in humanity, follow a man in a blue suit through Chelsea after dark. The district had that post-war glow, half neon, half nicotine, and every alley promised a disappointment. Saul Panzer was my shadow on the line, feeding updates through the hotel payphones like a metronome. At 8:47 p.m., he called from a bar near 23rd. "He's here, Archie," wearing the blue suit still, but it's more wrinkles than wool. Checked into the Kenmore Arms under the name James Milton, room 212. He's been hitting the bottle like it owes him money. "That's Nero, all right," I said. "Stay put. I'll be there in 15. When I reached the Kenmore Arms, the sign out front was missing its R, and the lobby smelled like its last bath had been gin. The night clerk had the enthusiasm of a wilted carnation. I slid him a 5 and a friendly smile. "Gentleman in 212, tall, nervous, blue suit. Still up?" He looked at the bill, then at me. "He's been up and down all evening. Keeps calling for ice, never for cents." "Good. I'll bring him some." The elevator was the size of a coffin and twice as cheerful. By the time I hit the second floor, Saul appeared from the stairwell, his hat brim low, face unreadable. "Still there?" I asked. Saul nodded. "He's alone, curtains half open, been talking to himself." "That's fine," I said. "I talk to myself too, usually when my boss says pfui." He didn't smile. "Be careful, he's jittery." I knocked twice. The voice inside cracked like old varnish. "Who is it?" "Room service. You're out of ice." A pause, then the door chain rattled, and one wary eye peered through. When the chain slid free, I pushed in gently. Nero stood there, thinner than his photograph, his blue suit hanging like gilt on a hanger. His tie was crooked, his collar grey with sweat. The room looked like it had survived an argument with gravity. Papers scattered, a bottle of rye on the dresser, 2 glasses, one half full. "Mr. Nero," I said, "you've been hard to find. I represent Nero Wolfe." He blinked, unsteady. "Wolfe? Wolfe? Oh, God, she said she'd go to him." "She did," I said. "Now she's dead." His jaw went slack. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the carpet. "Dead?" he croaked. "Poison," I said. "Cyanide. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" He staggered to the bed, collapsing onto it like a puppet with cut strings. "No, no, no. She wasn't supposed to, she only threatened. She said she'd go to the police if I didn't tell her about the ledgers." I moved closer. "Ledgers?" "The trust," he muttered. "Kellner kept 2 sets, one for the investors, one for himself. But she found them. She found them. I told him to destroy them, but he said no. Said we'd use them for leverage." His eyes darted around the room like he expected the wallpaper to start taking notes. "They killed her, don't you see? To keep the truth buried. I didn't mean to." He stopped, gasping. The veins in his forehead stood out like wires. "They're everywhere. You can't fight men who own banks. Even her dogs knew. They barked when—" He didn't finish. Outside, a car engine revved sharp and fast. A moment later, the window glass beside us spidered inward with 2 crisp cracks. Saul dove low, yelling, "Down!" Nero wasn't quick enough. The first shot caught him in the chest. The second turned his blue tie into a darker shade. He pitched forward, hitting the floor hard, eyes still open but seeing nothing useful. I flattened against the wall, pistol out, but by the time I reached the window, the street was empty except for a Ford sedan vanishing into traffic. The shots had been fired from across the alley. Professional distance, professional silence. Saul checked the body. "He's gone," he said quietly. "Yeah," I muttered, and I didn't even get to finish my questions. We searched the room. The suitcase was open, containing nothing but shirts and a small notebook with most of the pages torn out. In the pocket of his blue suit, I found a folded letter. It was smeared with sweat and bourbon, addressed simply, "Daphne." The note read, "If you tell them about the ledgers, we're both dead. Burn this. For God's sake, don't trust Healy." "Healy," I said aloud, "the dog breeder." Saul nodded grimly. "This ties her in." "Yeah, but now our witness just dropped dead of lead poisoning." We left before the uniforms arrived. The manager was already calling the police, so I slipped him another 5 and advised him to forget my face. He looked like a man who'd been forgetting things for years anyway. By the time I reached the brownstone, it was past 10. Wolfe was in his chair, immovable as a mountain of intellect. The office lights were low, the air thick with cigar smoke and contemplation. He looked up as I entered, scanning my face the way other men scan ledgers. "Well?" "Nero's dead," I said. He didn't react, not even a blink. "Describe." "Hotel in Chelsea. Blue suit, Half a bottle of rye, 2 bullets through the chest. Before he died, he said Daphne found out about the ledgers, mentioned a woman named Healy, told her not to trust her. Then bang, end of conversation. Wolfe closed his eyes and leaned back, fingers steepled. Our quarry dies with the precision of a clockmaker, he murmured. The mechanism ticks and then it stops, each death winding the next. I'd prefer a wristwatch that ran quiet, I said. We're losing suspects faster than I can type the reports. Do not whine, Archie. It is unbecoming. The man's death narrows the field. It also narrows our client list. Dead women don't pay bills. He gave me a look that could have frozen a thermos. Your levity is misplaced. Did he say anything of substance regarding the ledgers? He said there were 2 sets, one public, one private. The private ones might still exist, Wolfe's voice sharpened. Then find them, before the police do. That might be a tall order, I said. Kramer's going to crawl all over that hotel. Then crawl faster, he said. I lit a cigarette and leaned against the desk. You think Healy pulled the trigger? Doubtful. She lacks the arm and temperament. More likely an associate, or her chemist friend, Dr. Vale. The guy who used to work at St. Luke's? Yes, a man adept with compounds and possibly with guns. Lovely, I said. A chemist who moonlights as a marksman. We're collecting talents. He ignored the remark. You will telephone Saul and instruct him to continue surveillance on Mrs. Healy's kennel. Have Fred Durkin assist. His bulk may deter curiosity. Fred's bulk could deter traffic, I said, but I was already dialing. When the call was done, Wolfe reached for the bell cord. Fritz, he called. Beer? Fritz appeared at the doorway with his usual solemn grace, tray in hand. Wolfe poured the amber liquid into a chilled glass, watching it rise like proof of order in a chaotic universe. You seem calm, I said. Our only live witness just took a permanent nap. Wolfe's lips curved slightly. Calm is the privilege of intellect. Panic is the pastime of mediocrity. Yeah, I said. And bullets are the punctuation. He took a sip, then regarded me over the rim. Archie, you will deliver your report to Inspector Kramer by morning. Tell him nothing he does not already know. We must appear cooperative, but not useful. That's my specialty, I said. Indeed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked, precise and disinterested. Finally, Wolfe said, The colour blue, Archie. A symbol of loyalty, of trust. Yet tonight it cloaked deceit and death. How like our species to turn virtue into camouflage. Sure, I said, but it still photographs nicely. He exhaled. Go to bed. Tomorrow we resume the unpleasant task of unearthing the truth before it buries us. I stubbed out my cigarette and nodded. Fine, but if the next corpse wears chartreuse, I'm quitting. He allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Nonsense. You'd miss the excitement. Yeah, I said, heading for the door, like a toothache. Behind me, I heard the soft clink of glass on wood, the sound of Wolfe drinking to the dead. By the time I got back from headquarters, my pockets felt heavier than my conscience, which was saying something. Kramer had finally let me walk off with Merrow's effects, though not before giving me the kind of look that could blister varnish. He'd said, You tell Wolfe this is temporary custody, not adoption, and I'd told him I'd frame the warning. Now I was in the brownstone again, shaking off the afternoon drizzle and dropping a police envelope on Wolfe's desk. He looked up from a book thick enough to have its own zip code. Inspector Kramer, he said dryly, must be succumbing to benevolence. Not exactly. He said he's letting you have these so you can hang yourself more elegantly. His words, not mine. Pfui, Wolfe muttered, extending a hand. I emptied the loot. Merrow's wallet, a room key, a silver cigarette case engraved DK, and a crumpled handkerchief that smelled faintly of rye and guilt. Wolfe ignored everything but the case. He lifted it delicately, turning it over between his fingers like a jeweller studying a flawed diamond. DK, he said, Mrs. Daphne Kellner. Or a coincidence, I offered. Maybe he borrowed it for sentimental smoking. Men who borrow sentiment seldom return it. He pressed a latch and opened the case. Empty, except for a thin metal divider that didn't belong. He frowned, produced his penknife and pried it loose. Something small fluttered out onto the blotter, a square of translucent film, no bigger than a postage stamp. I leaned in. If that's a movie ticket, it's for the world's smallest theatre. Wolfe reached for his magnifying lens, his equivalent of a revolver, and bent over the desk. "No, Archie, it is a ledger. A microphotograph of ledger pages." I whistled low. So Nero wasn't carrying love letters. He was carrying Wall Street's conscience in miniature. Exactly. A marriage of greed and technology. He adjusted the light, eyes gleaming like a cat at a chessboard. Observe. Columns of figures, dates, signatures, the very heart of the Kellner Trust reduced to invisibility. Ingenious. Until somebody noticed, I said. Then they reduced Nero too. Wolfe grunted, half approval, half digestion. Indeed, the murderer understood the peril of revelation, but not its source. The clue was too small to see. "Guess that makes us far-sighted heroes," I said. He ignored that. "Where was this concealed?" "In the cigarette case. Kramer's men missed it. You can thank the department's devotion to fresh donuts." "I shall," he said, "when the case is concluded and I am still unarrested." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Archie, inform Inspector Kramer that I have identified the object as a microfilm of financial records. I will retain it for 12 hours, no more. He may send an officer to collect it tomorrow." "That's mighty courteous of you, almost friendly." "I am occasionally magnanimous," he said, "especially when my cooperation disguises self-interest." I grinned. "That's the Wolfe motto. I should embroider it on the bell cord." He gave me a glacial stare that melted about halfway. "Your levity is excessive, but serviceable. You may file a photostat of this microfilm at once. Fritz will prepare beer." "That's a sentence I like hearing," I said. As I reached for the safe, Wolfe was still gazing at the film under the lamp. Its tiny numbers glittered like a secret code from a world that had died of arithmetic. "If this keeps up," I said, sliding the envelope shut, "we'll solve it with a magnifying glass and a dog leash." He made a soft noise in his throat, not quite laughter, not quite threat. "Archie," he said, "the world conceals its crimes in small things. I merely insist on large rewards for finding them. If there's a smell that sums up human deceit, it isn't perfume or gin. It's disinfectant. The kind that tries too hard to scrub something away. Mrs. Healy's parlour in Queens had it in spades. Lace curtains, china dogs on the mantel, and that clinical tang that made you feel like you'd walked into a hospital ward wearing muddy shoes. She was a round woman in her 50s, wrapped in a floral apron and suspicion. When she opened the door, her smile came out half-baked. "You're from the paper?" "Not exactly," I said. "Private investigation. Name's Goodwin. I represent Nero Wolfe." At that, her eyes flicked sideways, quick as a rabbit near a trap. "Oh, the detective. I didn't think he bothered with animals." "He doesn't," I said. "He bothers with people who have them." She ushered me in, wiping her hands on the apron like she could erase her fingerprints. The room was a catalogue of good intentions, tidy, perfumed, and trying a little too hard. "Poor Mrs. Kellner," she said, settling into a floral chair. "Such a nice lady, always paid promptly. She came here every few months for supplies, and once for something unusual." I leaned against the doorway. Define unusual. Mrs. Healy hesitated, twisting her handkerchief. She wanted her dogs duplicated. The Spaniels. Said she needed a pair identical enough for showing, but she insisted one was to be kept strictly private. No registry, no papers, just a perfect twin. "Private," I repeated. "That's a popular word among smugglers and sinners. Any idea why?" Her lips pressed thin. "I don't pry, Mr. Goodwin. People pay for dogs. I breed them. What they do afterward is their affair." "Sure," I said. "But you must have noticed something. Different buyer? Extra delivery?" Her eyes darted toward the back door where a row of cages gleamed. "A man came once, not with her usual car. Short, neat blue suit. Looked like he'd rather handle stocks than Spaniels." Nero again, wearing loyalty like a borrowed tie. "Did he take the second dog?" I asked. Yes, paid cash. Mrs. Kellner didn't like it, but she said it was necessary." I stood, brushing an imaginary speck from my lapel. "Mrs. Healy, if someone asks, you never saw me. And if anyone else comes asking about those dogs, you call the brownstone on 35th Street. Collect, if you like." She clutched her handkerchief tighter. "Mr. Goodwin, are they dangerous, those men?" Lady, I said. Anyone who kills a woman and a dog's double is dangerous by definition. Outside, the Queen's air tasted like rust and worry. I caught the subway back to Manhattan, head full of mirror images. 2 Spaniels, 2 men, 2 sets of books, all hiding behind one reflection too many. When I walked into the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk, surrounded by more paper than a small bank. A pile of pedigrees sat beside a column of financial ledgers. "Ah, Archie," he said without looking up. "You smell of train grease and deceit." "Queens," I said. "Mrs. Healy breeds both." I gave him the rundown, the duplicate dogs, the cash payment, the blue-suited buyer. He listened, eyes half closed, fingers drumming on the armrest like a man marking time. "Duplication," he murmured when I finished. "A theme both zoological and criminal. 2 dogs, 2 men, 2 ledgers. Nature and vice share the same ambition to replicate advantage." "That's one way to put it," I said. "Maybe the next murder will come in pairs just to keep the rhythm." He reached for the bell cord. "Fritz," he called. "Beer." Then to me, "Archie, type your report. We are approaching the point where imitation becomes indistinguishable from truth, and that is where murder hides." I sat down at my desk. "Sure," I said. "Just tell me when you're ready to pick the real dog from the decoy." Dinner at the brownstone is usually a sacred ritual. 8 o'clock sharp, 3 courses, and enough silence to make the Vatican envious. Wolfe was halfway through Fritz's pheasant in wine sauce, eyes half closed like a monk at communion, when the universe decided to show bad manners. The doorbell rang. Now, interruptions during dinner were about as welcome to Wolfe as a mosquito at orchid hour. His fork froze mid-air. Fritz looked stricken, caught between culinary pride and household law. I was about to tell him to ignore it, but Wolfe's voice cut through the hush, low and edged. "Fritz." "Yes, sir." "See who it is. If it is anyone human, tell them to return after sunrise." Fritz nodded and disappeared, his shoes whispering on the carpet. Wolfe sighed, set down his fork, and pressed the bridge of his nose. There are few things more offensive than intrusion upon digestion. It is barbarism disguised as necessity. I poured him a little more beer. Maybe it's necessity with a sense of timing. That earned me a glare. "Archie, if Providence itself stands at my door, I shall still finish my pheasant before hearing its petition." I didn't argue, but then Fritz's voice came from the hall, taut and formal. "Mr. Wolfe, it is a courier. He insists this was marked urgent, hand delivery." That was enough to get Wolfe's attention. He muttered, "Pfui," but motioned for it. "Bring it here." Fritz returned carrying a small square parcel, brown paper tied with string, no return address. He set it gently beside Wolfe's plate, looking as though he'd just delivered a hand grenade. Wolfe scowled at it. "Archie." "Already on it," I said, pulling out my penknife. "Let's see if the universe mailed us dessert." I slit the twine, peeled the paper back, and froze. Inside was a small velvet box, the kind jewelers use for rings or regret. I flipped it open. Nestled on white satin lay a dog collar, polished leather, trimmed in brass. It had been cleaned, perfumed, and lovingly restored. The tag gleamed in the light, engraved with 2 words, "Return to Truth." Fritz crossed himself softly. "Well," I said, "either the ASPCA's got religion, or someone out there's playing postman to the dead." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but the air around him thickened. "Give it here." He lifted the collar delicately, studying it like a priest handling relics. The scent, jasmine, faint but deliberate, a woman's hand, and this. He turned the tag, catching the light. An epigram or a dare, possibly both. I glanced at Fritz. "You sure this came by courier? Not some stray from the canine afterlife?" "Yes, sir," he said. A man in uniform, grey coat, clean shoes. He said only, "Deliver promptly," and left. I took the box back, feeling the lining. Something scratched beneath the silk. I pressed the edge and pried up a loose seam. Out slipped a sliver of translucent film, tiny, curved, and unmistakably familiar. "Well," I said, holding it up, "either we've been blessed with recycling, or that's part of the missing microfilm." Wolfe's mouth compressed. "A fragment, intentionally placed, not lost." "Meaning somebody's taunting us," I said. "Meaning," he corrected, "somebody believes I require provocation." He rose, yes, actually rose from his chair, which told me the situation had officially turned biblical. Fritz stepped back, alarmed. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "seal the windows, lock the door. We are not to be observed or disturbed. Archie, fetch the magnifying apparatus." I went to the desk and retrieved the little lens set we'd used for the earlier film. Wolfe laid the fragment on a white envelope and bent over it. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. "It is the same ledger, but only a corner. Column headings, partial signatures. Someone has retained the rest." "To prove they've got it," I said, "or to bait you?" "Pride," he murmured. "The basest lever of intellect. They believe I will act rashly." "And will you?" He glanced up, eyes hard as obsidian. "No, but I will make them think I have." I grinned. Classic Wolfe, revenge by way of theatre. That got me a look. "You find this amusing?" "Only the part where someone thinks sending us scented dog jewelry will make you break a sweat." His tone cut the grin off clean. "Archie, this is no jest. Return to truth. It implies knowledge of our investigation and a deliberate inversion of our progress. Someone inside the circle knows what we possess and what we lack." That sobered me. "Meaning Mrs. Healy, the chemist, or Kramer's own boys?" "Possibly," he said, "or someone yet unseen." He straightened, rang the bell cord once, then again. Short, impatient pulls. Fritz appeared immediately. "Yes, sir." "The dinner may be cleared. The evening, alas, is ruined." When Fritz left, Wolfe turned to me. "You will telephone Inspector Kramer. Tell him I request a discreet protective detail on this house to be maintained until further notice." I whistled. "That's a first. You asking for protection?" He ignored that and strode to his desk. "And inform him this. A piece of police evidence has been delivered here by an unknown agent. I'm surrendering it in full, but I expect confidentiality." "Kramer's going to love this," I said. "He'll think the apocalypse has arrived." "Then he will not be alone." I made the call. It took 2 transfers and one operator who sounded like she'd rather be anywhere else, but eventually Kramer came on, his voice already smoking through the line. "What now, Goodwin? You find another corpse in your soup?" "Nope," I said. "Just a present. Small package delivered to the brownstone, a dog collar and a piece of that microfilm you've been babysitting." There was a long pause. "You're serious?" "As a tax audit, Wolfe says he's turning it over to you, but he wants quiet protection. No headlines, no leaks." On the other end, I heard the telltale grind of cigar against teeth. "When Wolfe asks for help," Kramer muttered, "the world's ending." "Maybe just molting," I said. "We'll expect your man within the hour." "And Inspector, your officer already picked up the original microfilm at 10 this morning, as agreed. What came tonight is a new fragment." When I hung up, Wolfe was at the window watching the street through the curtains. The city lights reflected faintly off his face, turning him into a statue thinking hard thoughts. "Kramer's sending someone," I said. He nodded. "Good. His presence will irritate me sufficiently to keep me alert. Always a healthy motivator." He turned, one eyebrow lifting. "Archie, there are moments when your levity approaches blasphemy." "Maybe," I said, "but it keeps the fear from showing." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in that low tone he uses when the mask slips just an inch, he said, "Your fear would be misplaced. I will not permit harm to reach you here." That landed heavier than a sermon. I just nodded and started clearing the papers. At 10:22, a police car pulled up outside. A plainclothes man took station across the street, hat brim low, collar up. Wolfe noted it with a grunt and sat again, reclaiming his beer as if to reassert dominion over chaos. "Archie," he said, "I am being courted by arrogance. That will not do." I leaned against the desk. "So what's the move?" He looked at the collar still gleaming on the blotter. "We return the gift, with interest." The tone told me the evening wasn't over, not by a long shot. He raised his glass, the faintest trace of amusement flickering in his eyes. "Pfui," he said softly. "Let them think me baited. When Saul Panzer calls after midnight, you can bet he's not phoning to share a recipe. The man's voice has 2 speeds, calm and emergency. This one was somewhere between. "Archie," he said, low and quick. "Courier from the Kellner package made another run. I tailed him. You'll want to tell Wolfe I'm at a print shop on Canal, number 38. Place looks abandoned, but somebody's inside with a press running. That was enough to sober me faster than Fritz's coffee. Need backup? I'll call if I live that long, he said, and hung up. 10 minutes later, I was in the roadster, heading downtown through streets that looked like they'd forgotten people existed. The kind of hour when the city feels like it's waiting for a confession. When I got there, Saul's car was parked half a block away, lights off. The building was an old 2-story warehouse with a hand-painted sign, still ghosting the brick. Benton and Sons, fine lithographers. I killed the engine and slipped in through the side alley. Saul appeared out of the shadows like an understudy for midnight itself. "Keep it low," he whispered. "Guy went in 20 minutes ago. Still inside." I heard metalwork. Press gears. We edged closer, finding a cracked window. Inside, pale light cut through the dust. 2 printing presses squatted like iron beasts, one of them running slow, steady, and very illegal. The man in the blue coat bent over a set of metal plates, humming to himself. Saul nudged me. "Plates, not newspapers. Look." I squinted. The text on the plate gleamed in reverse. Kellner Trust Securities. Preferred share certificate. I let out a low whistle. Well, well, forging the American dream. Saul's jaw tightened. He's not just copying signatures. He's remaking the whole financial series. Serial numbers, embossing, everything. Which means whoever hired him could erase the real ledgers and replace them clean. No theft, just a miracle of creative accounting. Before I could say more, the man looked up, head jerking toward the window. We ducked, but he'd heard something. He reached for a switch on the wall. There was a sharp hiss. Saul cursed under his breath. "Gas! He's rigged the place." We bolted for the back door, but the latch was jammed. I yanked my handkerchief over my nose, groping for a window. The hiss grew louder, a serpentine sound that didn't promise long-term health benefits. Saul smashed the pane with his elbow and climbed out first. I followed, landing in a heap beside him just as a muffled whoomp shook the air. A gout of flame licked the window, then went out as fast as it came. We stared at each other, both breathing like steam engines. "Well," I said, "next time we follow couriers, let's bring a priest." Saul straightened, brushing off his coat. "He's dead. No way he made it out." "Maybe," I said, "but let's not hang around to be witnesses." We left as sirens began to wail somewhere uptown. I drove us back to the brownstone, Saul riding silent beside me, the smell of gas still clinging to our clothes. When we walked into Wolfe's office, the clock showed 1:42. He was waiting, robe on, beer at hand, as though midnight disasters were part of his schedule. "You've disturbed orchid hours," he said, eyeing Saul. "That must mean you bring substance." Saul gave the report without embellishment. Wolfe listened, motionless except for the slight tapping of his fingers on the desk. When Saul described the forgery plates, Wolfe's eyes flickered open wider. "Forgery of securities," he said. "A crime of elegance. Continue." Saul finished with the explosion. Wolfe absorbed it in silence. Then he spoke. The forgery, the deaths, the missing microfilm, all components of one enterprise. Mr. Kellner and Mr. Nero intended to replace the trust's authentic certificates with counterfeits, backed by falsified ledgers. Their disappearance suggests unfinished work or treachery. I said, "So the plan was to make billions vanish legally, like a rabbit out of a banker's hat." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Murder by bookkeeping." I leaned back. "And the man with the gas leak?" "The artisan," Wolfe said. "Eliminated by his employers to prevent confession. He was the craftsman. They were the financiers. It is an old alliance, skill and greed ending as it always does, in combustion." Saul nodded grimly. I didn't get a look at anyone else. The courier's ashes are probably still smouldering. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, you will notify Inspector Kramer at once. Tell him the explosion on Canal concerns our case. No details yet, only that the evidence of forgery exists. He will send his men." "Sure," I said. "He'll love hearing from us again. It'll make his night." Wolfe ignored that and reached for his beer. "Saul, excellent work. You have risked your life in pursuit of a truth that will enrich only my irritation. You may retire." Saul allowed himself the faintest smile. "That's gratitude, Wolfe style." He left, closing the door softly. I turned to Wolfe. So where do we go from here? The money trail's burned, the microfilm's in pieces, and the suspects are either dead or hiding behind pedigree dogs. He sipped, set down the glass and said, "We go nowhere. They will come to us." "You're sure?" "Archie," he said, "men who commit grand larceny on a national scale do not tolerate loose ends. They will learn that one of those ends leads here. Their pride will compel them to tug it." "And when they do?" "Then," he said, "we shall have them by the throat." I whistled softly. "You make it sound like you're waiting for the wolves to knock." "Phooey," he muttered. "They are jackals, not wolves, and I intend to feed them poison wrapped in reason." That sounded like an invitation I didn't want printed. I rose to fetch a clean sheet for my report. He watched me a moment, then said, almost gently, "Archie, I regret exposing you to this risk. I would prefer the danger remained theoretical." "Thanks," I said, "but it's a little late for theory. I already smell like gas and guilt." He actually smiled, a brief, dry quirk of the mouth. "You are intolerable, but indispensable." "Flattery noted," I said. "Want me to phone Kramer now, or wait till he's had his second cigar?" "Now," Wolfe said, reaching for his bell cord. "Fritz will bring coffee. We shall need wakefulness. By dawn, the city will smell of smoke and avarice." I sat down at the desk and began dialing. "Another normal night at Nero Wolfe's," I said. He closed his eyes. "Archie," he murmured, "no night is normal when men counterfeit truth itself." And somewhere out there in the ashes of Canal Street, somebody's fortune had just gone up in smoke, along with their last good chance of getting away with it. He said he'd signed them out from the ASPCA for temporary observation. His words, not mine. He came in like a thundercloud with fur under each arm, Stebbins trailing behind him holding leashes like he was handling evidence from Mars. The dogs were shivering and whining, which made them the calmest creatures in the room. "Goodwin," Kramer barked. "Your boss said he wanted a closer look at these animals. Congratulations, you got custody. But if they so much as sneeze on police time, I'll have your license for cruelty to detectives." I opened the door wider. "Well, Inspector, we're honoured. Most men bring flowers." Kramer grunted, stomped inside, and let the dogs loose on the office rug. Wolfe was behind his desk, yellow suspenders in place, glaring as though the invasion violated zoning laws. "Good morning, Inspector," he said. "To what do I owe the pleasure of canine society?" Kramer plunked down a manila envelope on the desk. "Headlines. The Gazette says you're sitting on the case like a hen on a bomb. My superiors want progress, or theatrics. I decided you could have both." Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. "You presume I requested animals for amusement?" "I presume you're up to something," Kramer said. "I just can't tell if it's genius or lunacy." I guided the Spaniels toward the corner. "Relax, boys. The worst he does is quote Latin." Fritz appeared in the doorway with the timing of a saint. "Mr. Wolfe, lunch in 10 minutes." Then he saw the dogs. His expression tightened to a polite horror usually reserved for overcooked sauce. "They'll remain only briefly," Wolfe told him. "Yes, sir," Fritz said, backing away like he'd encountered sin in fur form. Kramer folded his arms. "You wanted them observed. Start observing." Wolfe motioned toward the low table beside his desk. "Archie, prepare the basin." We'd used the same shallow dish last week to soak a glass for fingerprints. I filled it halfway with one of Wolfe's homemade cleaning solutions, something he swore was harmless to everything but ignorance. The dogs sniffed it once, then recoiled like I'd offered them brimstone. One started whining, the other let out a low growl that would have made a mailman nervous. "Interesting," Wolfe murmured. "Very." "Maybe they don't like your brand of polish," I said. He shot me a look. "Silence, Archie. Animals reveal more through instinct than men through intellect." Kramer snorted. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It means, Inspector," Wolfe said, "that these creatures recognize a scent associated with distress, specifically with death." The growling got worse until I knelt beside them. "Easy now," I said, pulling out my handkerchief to wipe one's muzzle. The effect was instant. Both dogs went quiet, tails wagging. Kramer blinked. "What the hell?" I shrugged. "Guess they like my laundry soap." Fritz's voice came from behind us, soft, astonished. "Not soap, Mr. Goodwin. Perfume." We all turned. Fritz stood in the doorway again, hands clasped. That handkerchief. You wore it last night when you brushed against Mrs. Kellner's scarf. I remember the scent. French, Coeur de Nuit, very rare. I used to import it before the war. Kramer scowled. Lab just came in, no cyanide in the brandy itself, but they found trace on the rim and on fibres from her scarf. Wolfe nodded once. Of course. The toxin was applied to the perfume, absorbed at the pulse points, and transferred to whatever she touched, her glass included. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Coeur de Nuit. A floral base with almond notes. Bitter almond. Kramer frowned. So? Cyanide, Wolfe said softly. Derived from the same oils. If the perfume were adulterated, concentrated, it could deliver poison through absorption. The skin, the pulse points. Kramer looked at him like he'd announced he could murder with vocabulary. You're telling me she was poisoned by perfume? I am, Wolfe said. The toxin was not ingested but worn. The scent itself was the weapon. I whistled low. Luxury as lethal injection. She sprays herself to look glamorous and ends up embalmed before dessert. Kramer rubbed his face, exhaling smoke that wasn't even lit. And the dogs? Why'd they go berserk? They recognized it, Wolfe said. Mrs. Kellner wore the same scent when they were last with her. They associate it with her death, or with the moment preceding it. Their reaction is instinctive memory. Fritz nodded gravely. And your solution, sir. It contains alcohol compounds. It would reawaken that scent. Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. Precisely. Kramer let out a growl to match the Spaniels. You realize how this sounds. I can't put murder by perfume in a police report. Then don't, Wolfe said smoothly. Put murder by absorption of cyanide compounds concealed in personal fragrance. It will impress your superiors. He tugged the bell cord. Fritz, have these dogs cleaned, fed, and isolated. They have endured trauma enough. And bring coffee for Mr. Goodwin. He has apparently served as both nurse and catalyst. Fritz inclined his head and led the dogs out gently. Kramer lingered, muttering, I swear, Wolfe, someday you'll solve a case with a sandwich recipe. Wolfe smiled faintly. When I do, Inspector, I shall expect your applause. Kramer grunted. All right, I'll wait for your report. But if the papers print that perfume theory, you can explain it to the Commissioner yourself. He left, door slamming behind him. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, make a note. We are now hunting a perfumer, or a chemist with access to fragrance oils, one who kills with elegance. I sipped my coffee. At least we'll smell good while doing it. Wolfe sighed. You are incorrigible. Sure, I said, but indispensable. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe hold court, imagine a cathedral where the organ eats beefsteak and the choir smells of orchids. That was the office at 8 o'clock sharp when the suspects arrived, 5 of them, nervous as choir boys caught with hymn money. Kramer came first, cigar already lit for combat. Then Lon Cohen with his notebook and eyes like a camera lens. The Kellner's lawyer, a thin man with the morals of a briefcase, hovered near the window. Mrs. Healy, the dog breeder, clutched her handbag as if it contained salvation. And the chemist, Dr. Ambrose Vale, stood pale and slick, the kind of man who believes a white coat doubles as a halo. Wolfe sat behind his desk like a patient volcano, fingertips pressed together, gaze fixed on nothing and everything. The air had weight. Even the Spaniels in the hallway went quiet, as if they knew this was the final act. Kramer grunted. All right, Wolfe. You said you wanted them all here. Make it quick. I've got the DA chewing my ears off. Wolfe didn't look up. Inspector, brevity is a virtue ill-suited to revelation. Sit. Kramer sat. That alone was a small miracle. Wolfe's voice rolled out like measured thunder. You have all lied, in degrees calibrated to self-interest. But lies, like compounds, react when mixed. He turned to the lawyer. Mr. Nevin, you represented both Daphne and Howard Kellner in the trust transactions. You knew the ledgers had been falsified, yet you did not report it. Nevin bristled. That's conjecture. Phooey, Wolfe said. It is arithmetic. The Kellner Trust reported capital 20% above its market holdings. Only a lawyer blind to numbers, or bribed, could overlook that. He pivoted, eyes narrowing on Vale. And you, sir, The chemist who assisted Mrs. Healy with canine sedatives. You mixed compounds for her dogs, yes, but also for her client, Mrs. Kellner. You supplied a perfume base enhanced with cyanide oils. A charming experiment. Dr. Ambrose Vale, formerly of St. Luke's Hospital. You supplied a perfume base enhanced with cyanide oils. She believed you her escape from corruption. Instead, she found a partner in it. Mrs. Healy gasped, the sound of a conscience remembering itself. He told me she was using the dogs to smuggle bonds. She was not, Wolfe said, but she discovered the fraud. Her mirror held scratches where she tested the poisoned vapor. A warning unheeded. Kramer leaned forward. You're saying this guy murdered her by perfume? Precisely. He infused her own scent with death, ensuring that beauty would deliver execution. Vale composure cracked. She threatened everything. The trust, the money, we had no choice. On the contrary, Wolfe said, his tone colder than logic. You had a choice. You chose efficiency over honor. The silence that followed was dense enough to bottle. Lon Cohen scribbled furiously, already converting tragedy into tomorrow's headline. Mrs. Healy sobbed softly into her gloves. Kramer rose, tugging his cigar from his mouth. That's enough confession for me. He nodded to Stebbins, who'd been standing like a statue by the door. Take him. Vale didn't resist. He just stared at Wolfe as though the words had peeled him open. When they were gone, Wolfe leaned back, exhaled, and reached for his beer. Duplicity breeds in pairs, dogs, ledgers, lovers, and inevitably destruction. Kramer stopped at the threshold. For once, Wolfe, you can have the last word. He left. I closed the door and turned. That was tidy. Want me to type it up before or after dessert? Wolfe's eyelids lowered. After, Archie. Justice, like digestion, must never be rushed. Some evenings the brownstone feels like a monastery that accidentally took a vow of luxury. That night the fire was humming low, the air smelled of Fritz's roast duck, and 2 spaniels snored in front of the hearth with the kind of peace you only get after someone else solves your problems for you. I was at my desk, typing the final invoice. Neat, double-spaced, professional. Nero Wolfe, confidential investigations. Services rendered, restoration of truth and preservation of 2 canine lives. Fee, $30,000. It looked good on the page, which is more than I could say for the headlines in the Gazette. Wolfe sat behind his desk, templed fingers and a glower sharp enough to slice paper. The Gazette lay open beside him. Across the front page, in cheerful type that probably made Lon Cohen's day, ran the words, "The dog detective strikes again." He exhaled through his nose like an offended emperor. Intolerable. The vulgarization of language by the press continues its relentless march. I looked up from the typewriter. I thought it was rather flattering. Dog detective has a snappy ring. Kids will start collecting your trading cards. He growled. Archie, to trivialize my work with such asinine sobriquets. Could be worse, I said. They might have gone with the lapdog of justice. He shot me a look that would have peeled wallpaper, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch before he buried it in his beer glass. Fritz had brought it earlier, chilled, golden, obediently silent in its stein. The fire crackled. One of the spaniels stretched, sighed, and rolled over. The other snored on, undisturbed by the weight of human folly. Archie, Wolfe said finally, lowering the paper. These animals have been singularly fortunate. They've got good lawyers, I said. He ignored me. They have lost their mistress, yet gained sanctuary. They have witnessed deceit, yet will know comfort. Few men fare so well. I leaned back in the chair. If you're going sentimental on me, I'll fetch a thermometer. Pfui, he muttered. Sentiment is indulgence. Reflection, however, is necessary. We pursue truth not for justice, which is haphazard, but for equilibrium, to restore proportion to a disordered world. That's one way to put it, I said, though I kinda like the simpler version. We get paid. His eyes narrowed. $30,000, Archie, is not remuneration for avarice. It is tribute to intellect. Spoken like a man who doesn't have to haggle with accountants. Fritz appeared in the doorway, polished as ever, and announced, "Dinner is served, Mr. Wolfe." He glanced fondly at the dogs. "Shall I prepare their meal as well?" "Indeed," Wolfe said. "They have earned more civility than their late owners." When Fritz disappeared, Wolfe rose, slowly, carefully, as though gravity were a negotiable term. "Archie, mail the invoice tomorrow, and inform Mr. Nevin that the balance must arrive by certified cheque, not the usual perfidious promissory note." "Right," I said, pulling the finished page from the typewriter. "And if the Gazette runs another story calling you the dog detective, should I send them a cease and desist or a photo of the dogs for publicity?" He stopped at the door and glared over his shoulder. "Neither. Send them silence. It is the only response proportionate to inanity." "Got it. Silence with postage." He left for the dining room, the Spaniels padding after him like furry footmen. For a minute the office was quiet except for the fire's steady murmur and the faint tapping of my typewriter ribbon settling back into place. I slid the invoice into an envelope, sealed it, and leaned back. $30,000 for truth, 2 dogs, and 1 newspaper nickname seemed fair. From the dining room came Wolfe's voice, faint but distinct. "Archie, if you are finished musing, dinner awaits." "Coming," I said, getting up. "Just making sure the world knows who solved it." "Phooey," he replied, and for once it sounded almost like affection. It was one of those nights when even the city seemed to take a breath. The rain that had flirted with the windows earlier had moved on to harass Brooklyn, and what was left behind was the kind of stillness you could lean against. The brownstone, usually a reliable mix of ticking clocks and Fritz's culinary noises, had settled into something near silence. I was closing the blinds in the office when I caught our reflections in the glass, mine standing behind Wolfe's desk, his bulk settled in the yellow chair like a monument that had no plans of being moved. The fire behind him threw enough light to catch the shine of the beer glass in his hand and the soft motion of the Spaniels curled on the rug. For a second, the picture looked like it belonged in one of those magazine spreads titled Men of Distinction. Of course, the caption would have to read, "The Thinker and the Guy Who Has to Do the Thinking's Footwork." He hadn't said anything for the better part of half an hour, which was either peace or a prelude to philosophy. With Wolfe, you could never tell which. I finished with the blinds and turned. "Everything's locked up tight," I said. "No reporters under the window, no process servers on the porch, and no new corpses cluttering the stoop. It's almost disappointing." Wolfe grunted softly. "You have a curious concept of tranquility, Archie. You regard its absence as an irritant." "Sure," I said. "Without it, I might have to get a real hobby." He didn't rise to the bait. That's the thing about Wolfe. When he's in a reflective mood, he reflects you right out of your own wisecracks. He sat there, eyes half-lidded, studying the fire as if it owed him an explanation. The faint pop of a log was the only thing that dared interrupt him. Finally, he spoke. "It is finished." I knew better than to ask what. When Wolfe uses that tone, the subject isn't the case anymore. It's the state of the universe. "Kramer called," I said, settling into the red chair. "He says the chemist's already singing. Claims he only meant to scare Daphne Kellner, not kill her. Seems the songwriters on Tin Pan Alley aren't the only ones with a gift for rewriting history." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "The man is a fool. Poison, Archie, is a declaration of vanity. It requires precision, yes, but also presumption, the belief that one can manipulate nature without consequence. He wished to kill without the vulgarity of violence. He achieved only mediocrity." "Kramer said about the same thing," I said, "except he used shorter words." That got me a flicker of a glance from under Wolfe's heavy lids. I suppose he did. Still, his execution of duty was commendable. I shall send him a note. "Don't," I said. "If you ever send Kramer a note, he'll think it's a death threat." Wolfe's lips quirked in something that, on another man, might have passed for a smile. "Perhaps, but he is not altogether deficient in discernment. He knew enough to bring the Spaniels here instead of to the pound." The dogs stirred at the mention, tails giving a half-hearted thump. They'd made themselves at home in the last few days, adopting the hearth as if Wolfe had personally willed it into existence for them. "They've got taste," I said, "and a better sense of loyalty than half the clients we've had this year." He lifted his glass and studied the amber surface. "Loyalty," he said softly, "an unfashionable virtue in commerce and companionship alike, yet indispensable." "That's your version of sentiment," I said. "If I didn't know better, I'd think the beer was spiked." He ignored me, of course. That was our rhythm, my noise, his silence. You could have set a metronome by it. I leaned back. "You know, it's funny," I said. A case that started with mirrors and dogs' ends with a reflection and a pair of them snoring on the carpet. There's probably some cosmic lesson there, but I'm too practical to look for it. Wolfe's voice came low and deliberate. The lesson, Archie, is fidelity. It exists only in pairs, each half sustaining the other. The woman trusted the wrong man, and she died. The animals trusted the right ones, and they live. The symmetry is crude, but it will suffice. I gave him a grin. If you're working your way up to a toast, make it snappy. The dogs are out cold, and I'm halfway there. He raised the glass slightly, the firelight glinting on it. To fidelity, he said, in men and beasts. I clinked my empty soda glass against his beer, and in paychecks preferably. That earned me one of his rare smiles, the kind that starts small, like he's trying to hide it, then gives up halfway through. Outside, the city hummed. You could almost hear the traffic pulse along 35th Street, a distant, steady heartbeat. Somewhere down the block, a cab honked, and the sound drifted up like punctuation at the end of our little sermon. Fritz appeared in the doorway then, wearing that serene composure that made you wonder if he practiced in front of mirrors. "Mr. Wolfe, would you care for coffee before bed?" "No," Wolfe said. "Tomorrow will arrive without stimulant assistance." "Very good, sir." Fritz's eyes flicked toward the dogs. "Shall I take them down for the night?" "No," Wolfe said again. "Let them remain. They have earned the warmth." When Fritz left, the silence returned, softer this time. I watched Wolfe watching the fire, and for once I didn't break it with a wisecrack. The room felt balanced, him in his chair, me at my desk, the world outside pretending to mind its own business. After a minute I said, "You ever notice when the light hits the glass just right, we both show up in it? You sitting there like the Statue of Liberty after a big lunch, and me hovering over you like a guilty conscience?" Wolfe's eyes shifted to the darkened window where our reflections wavered in the lamplight. "Mirrors," he said, "are treacherous things. They tell the truth only by accident." "Maybe," I said. "But this one looks about right. You doing the thinking, me doing the moving." He exhaled through his nose, a quiet huff of acknowledgement. "Then let us hope neither of us tires of his role." "Not likely," I said. "You'd have to learn to climb stairs again, and I'd have to start thinking for a living." His eyes closed halfway. "Then the world is safe." The fire cracked again. The spaniels twitched in their sleep. And just before the clock struck midnight, Wolfe lifted his glass one last time, not for a toast this time, but as if acknowledging something invisible between us. He said, "Archie." "Yeah?" "Lock the door." I did. Then I looked back at the window. Two shapes in the glass, one broad, one lean, both steady. For once the mirror wasn't lying.